This week, I accidentally got myself into a fight. Not fisticuffs, of course, because we both know that I would kill every money funster in the room. This was beef on Twitter. What? Beef on Twitter? Surely not. Twitter is such a beautifully playful and kind and accepting platform. I know, right? But what do you know? Apparently, on Twitter, sometimes people get angry and there's beef. So let me quickly catch you up to speed and then you can feel my wrath. Now, this all started because the band Falling in Reverse had to cancel a show because they lost their laptops which had all of their backing tracks on. Now, that was no biggie, but then a guy called Eddie Trunk chimed in on Twitter. Now, Eddie Trunk calls himself a music historian. I don't know what the fuck that is, but also he's a radio DJ, but he was not happy and he very much dislikes it when bands use backing tracks. And then Sebastian Bach chimed in. No, not the dead one. The shepherd's pie one. Or the shepherd's pie! You know the guy. Anyway, long story short, it was on. And the boomers were fucking angry. Now, last week, Rick Beato, everyone's favorite online YouTube music human, made a video about this subject and about backing tracks. And in it, he talked about the technicalities of production. He even talked about nowadays how lights and sounds are even triggered off the backing track. It's a great video. I'll put the link down below. Now, this very much triggered the music purists that hate bands playing with live backing tracks. Mostly boomers that still can't use their Sky remote control. Now, when music purists get on their high horse about this stuff, they generally forget about one thing: the general public. And by that, I don't mean the 10% of musicians that actually give a shit about backing tracks. I'm talking about the 90% who just want to turn up, watch a band, and have a great time. 99.9% of bands and artists who are going out have an audience which aren't music related. So unless you're into Snarky Puppy or Dream Theater, most people aren't watching the gig going, hang on a minute, I can hear a saxophone, but I can't see a saxophone. You see, the live music industry is an ecosystem. So whilst you have the artist, or mostly the singer at the front of the stage, then there's everybody else involved. You have the musicians, you have the session musicians, you have the producers, you have the venues, you have the promoters, you have the live agents, you have the rehearsal rooms, you have the tour buses or the splitter vans, you have the sound engineers, you have the lighting engineers, you have the stage crew, etc., etc., etc. But for argument's sake, indulge me on this as we dive into the world's most ridiculous rabbit hole. Now, most acts that go out will probably feature standard guitar, bass, drums, vocals, maybe a keyboard or a second guitarist. But in the last 10 to 20 years, so many records, albums and songs have been made where that doesn't really cut it on a live stage. Which means you might need an extra keyboard player, or maybe an extra 2 keyboard players, or an extra guitarist, or some extra acoustic guitar, or some BVs, or a percussion player, or heaven forbid, a choir. Or what if we need an orchestra? But when we've got all that in place, it is 100% live, just the way that God intended. It is pure. And your ticket price is $1,000. Hang on a minute, that sounds quite expensive. Well, it is expensive, but you got to pay the musicians. I mean, you want to pay the musicians, don't you? You don't want to be working for exposure, do you? But then you've got transport and accommodation. That's going to be a lot with all these extra people. You got to feed them, so you got to have food. Oh, you got to have more crew because obviously this is a bigger show. But the good news is, when you're watching, you do get to see that percussion player and you're going to be banging them bongos. You're going to love it. Okay, all joking aside, let's be real here and out of cloud, head up your ass. Some acts, 3, 4, 5 pieces, do not need backing tracks. Let's take Skid Row, Sebastian Bach's band. 2 guitars, 5 guys, a lot of distortion, a big energy show. Don't need it. The problem is, there's so many other acts that do. But the problem is, most audience members don't want to pay extra to see a 3rd keyboard player turn up to play maybe 3 songs, no matter how good he is. By the way, that's another thing, is no one ever talks about how good the musicians have to be to play along with that backing track. It's always how it sounds terrible and it's not real. And I'm thinking, these musicians probably have to be pretty good to make this sound good and groove with a backing track. Also, let me just say this. Anybody who is against backing tracks live surely has never been on tour in their entire life. Because whilst we all know that touring is wonderful and beautiful and it's just a family, except after a couple of weeks, I'm looking at ways to murder every single one of my bandmates. I'm thinking about smothering the drummer to death. Sometimes you're driving along and I'm thinking, just the way you make me breathe, I'm thinking I'm just going to steer this van into a tree while I'm doing 90. The last thing I need on tour at that point is more assholes to deal with every single day. But if you remove backing tracks from most acts, then they won't tour. Because A, they won't enjoy it, but number two, they won't be able to. They won't be able to make it sound good enough with the small amounts of people that they can take with them and afford. So what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of people don't get paid. It means the producer that made the backing tracks, well, he doesn't get paid. It means the venue, well, they don't have a gig, which means the live agent and the promoter, well, they don't have a gig, which means the musicians and the session musicians, well, they're not going to get paid, which means the crew, the lighting guy, the sound person, they're not going to get paid either. And most importantly, the audience, 99% of whom cannot give a shit if there's some percussion or some extra keys or some extra guitar or a little bit of BVs that goes on the backing track, they can't go and see the gig. So what are they going to do? They're going to stay at home and they're going to just be bored watching the Great British Bake Off. Actually, I very much like the Great British Bake Off, so let's say Love Island. I just don't get it. What is the big deal? I can hear instruments, but I can't actually see them being played, and that's made me really angry. And if you are an act that can go out and don't need backing tracks, that's great. But that doesn't mean you're better than an artist or an act that has decided to fill out the sound of their show to give their audience the best night that they possibly can. It's not a badge of honor. Everything is there to enhance the sound. It's like me saying, oh, you use a PA. I just sing really loud because I've got a really loud voice. Means I'm better than you. Is ridiculous. Now, as a musician who's played thousands of gigs, hundreds of them with backing tracks, I can say that when you play with a backing track, you sound fuller, you sound bigger, and you can save money and it's more cost effective, which means you make some more money from your tour. But from a downside point of view, it means, well, it's not as fun. And you can't go off into improvisation because you are playing rigidly to a track. And clearly things can go wrong. I don't quite know how they managed to lose their laptop, but they did. And if your drums got nicked out of the van or your guitar snapped in half, then you'd probably pull the gig too. But I would rather have a tour with a backing track rather than no tour whatsoever, because as a musician, that's your livelihood. That's how you make money. Don't forget, this is the music business. It's not as if Spotify is paying a handsome reward for your music, and this is where you can make money. So if you have to take all of the instruments in order to be credible and pure for other musicians, all that's going to happen is you're going to be very skint for a very long time. Now, if this rant has triggered you, then this one is going to turn your shit white. So I dare you to click it.